Section 9 of A Visit to the Holy Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 5 of A Visit to the Holy Land, Egypt and Italy, Part 1, by Ida L. Pfeiffer. The extremely unfavorable reports I heard from Beirut and Palestine caused me to defer my departure from day to day. When I applied to my consul for a firman (Turkish) passport, I was strongly advised not to travel to the Holy Land. The disturbances on Mount Lebanon and the plague were, they assured me, enemies too powerful to be encountered, except in cases of the most urgent necessity. A priest who had arrived from Beirut about 2 months previously affirmed positively that, in consequence of the serious disturbances, even he, known though he was far and wide as a physician, had not dared to venture more than a mile from the town without exposing himself to the greatest danger. He advised me to stay in Constantinople until the end of September, and then to travel to Jerusalem with the Greek caravan. This, he said, was the only method to reach that city in safety. One day I met a pilgrim in a church who came from Palestine. On my asking his advice, he not only confirmed the priest's report, but even added that one of his companions had been murdered whilst journeying homeward, and that he himself had been despoiled of his goods, and had only escaped death through the special interposition of Providence. I did not at all believe the asseverations of this man. He related all his adventures with such a barren Munchausian air, assumed probably to excite admiration. I continued my investigations on this subject until I was at length fortunate enough to find someone who told an entirely different tale. From this I felt assured, at least, of the fact that it would be almost impossible to learn the true state of the case here in Constantinople, and at length made up my mind to avail myself of the earliest opportunity of proceeding as far as Beirut, where there was a chance of my getting at the truth. I was advised to perform this journey in male attire, but I did not think it advisable to do so, as my short, spare figure would have seemed to belong to a youth, and my face to an old man. Moreover, as I had no beard, my disguise would instantly have been seen through, and I should have been exposed to much annoyance. I therefore preferred retaining the simple costume, consisting of a kind of blouse and wide Turkish trousers, which I then wore. The further I travelled, the more I became persuaded how rightly I had acted in not concealing my sex. Everywhere I was treated with respect, and kindness and consideration were frequently shown me merely because I was a woman. On May 17th I embarked on board a steamboat belonging to the Austrian Lloyd. It was called the Archduke John. It was with a feeling of painful emotion that I stood on the deck, gazing with an air of abstraction at the preparations for the long voyage which were actively going on around me. Once more I was alone among a crowd of people, with nothing to depend on but my trust in Providence. No friendly, sympathetic being accompanied me on board. All was strange. The people, the climate, country, language, the manners and customs, all strange. But a glance upward at the unchanging stars, and the thought came into my soul, "Trust in God, and thou art not alone." And the feeling of despondency passed away, and soon I could once more contemplate with pleasure and interest all that was going on around me. Near me stood a poor mother who could not bear to part with her son. Time after time she folded him in her arms, and kissed and blessed him. Poor mother! Wilt thou see him again, or will the cold ground be a barrier between you till this life is past? Peace be with you both. A whole tribe of people came noisily toward us. They were friends of the crew, who bounced about the ship from stem to stern, canvassing its merits in comparison with French and English vessels. Suddenly there was a great crowding on the swinging ladder, of chests, boxes, and baskets. Men were pushing and crushing backwards and forwards. Turks, Greeks, and others quarrelled and jostled each other for the best places on the upper deck, and in a few moments the whole large expanse wore the appearance of a bivouac. Mats and mattresses were everywhere spread forth, provisions were piled up in heaps, and culinary utensils placed in order beside them. And before these preparations had been half completed, the Turks began washing their faces, hands, and feet, and unfolding their carpets to perform their devotions. In one corner of the ship I even noticed that a little low tent had been erected. It was so closely locked that for a long time I could not discern whether human beings or merchandise lay concealed within. No movement of the interior was to be perceived, and it was not until some days afterwards that I was informed by a Turk what the tent really contained. A sheikh from the Syrian coast had purchased 2 girls at Constantinople, and was endeavouring to conceal them from the gaze of the curious. I was for 9 days on the same vessel with these poor creatures, and during the whole time had not an opportunity of seeing either of them. At the debarkation, too, they were so closely muffled that it was impossible to discover whether they were white or black. At 6 o'clock the bell was rung to warn all strangers to go ashore, and now I could discover who were really to be the companions of my journey. I had flattered myself that I should find several Franks on board, who might be bound to the same destination as myself, but this hope waxed fainter and fainter every moment, as one European after another left the ship, until at length I found myself alone among the strange Oriental nations. The anchor was now weighed, and we moved slowly out of the harbour. I offered up a short but fervent prayer for protection on my long and dangerous voyage, and with a calmed and strengthened spirit I could once more turn my attention towards my fellow passengers, who, having concluded their devotions, were sitting at their frugal meal. During the whole time they remained on the steamer these people subsisted on cold provisions, such as cheese, bread, hard-boiled eggs, anchovies, olives, walnuts, a great number of onions, and dried mishmush, a kind of small apricot, which instead of being boiled is soaked in water for a few hours. In a sailing vessel it is usual to bring a small stove and some wood, in order to cook pilau, beans, fowls, and to boil coffee, etc. This, of course, is not allowed on a steamboat. The beauty of the evening kept me on deck, and I looked with a regretful feeling towards the imperial city, until the increasing distance and the soft veil of evening combined to hide it from my view, though at intervals the graceful minarets were still dimly discernible through the mists. But who shall describe my feelings of joy when I discovered a European among the passengers? Now I was no longer alone. In the first moments we even seemed fellow countrymen, for the barriers that divide Europeans into different nations fall as they enter a new quarter of the globe. We did not ask each other, "Are you from England, France, Italy?" We inquired, "Whither are you going?" and on its appearing that this gentleman intended proceeding, like myself, to Jerusalem, we at once found so much to talk about concerning the journey, that neither of us thought for a moment of inquiring to what country the other belonged. We conversed in the universal French language, and were perfectly satisfied when we found we could understand each other. It was not until the following day that I discovered the gentleman to be an Englishman, and learned that his name was Bartlett. In Constantinople we had both met with the same fate. He had been, like myself, unable to obtain any certain intelligence, either at his consuls or from the inhabitants, as to the feasibility of a journey to Jerusalem, and so he was going to seek further information at Beirut. We arranged that we would perform the journey from Beirut to Jerusalem in company, if indeed we found it possible to penetrate among the savage tribe of Druses and Maronites. So now I no longer stood unprotected in the wide world. I had found a companion as far as Jerusalem, the goal of my journey, which I could now hope to reach. I was well satisfied with the arrangements on board. I had made up my mind, though not without sundry misgivings, to take a second-class berth, and on entering the steamer of the Austrian Lloyd, I discovered to my surprise how much may be effected by